the topic which we've probably spent more airtime on this podcast than anything else. Who are England going to pick in midfield? Charles, do you want to start with that?
A prediction or my opinion?
But I'll take both.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I was Steve Borthwick, I think I'd slip Owen Farrell back to 10, and I'd have Marcus Smith coming off the bench to win the game if needed around the 65th, 70th minute. I think I'd have Dan Kelly at 12. And I would have had Henry Slade at 13 in all honesty, but I think I'd probably go with Manu now at 13. I think they will have Dan Kelly at 12. I mean, that's not based on any kind of inside information, except for we know that how highly he's rated by Steve Borthwick and Kevin Sinfield, and he's a very, very well-rounded and very, very gifted 12. And we know that Owen Farrell is going to start as he's the captain, so I can see them moving him back to fly half. And then 13 is anyone's guess. It could be Manu. I mean, you'd expect it not to be Ollie Lawrence, considering he wasn't named in the squad originally. But stranger things have happened at sea.
Charlie, what about you? What are you expecting?
Jeez, I thought it was going to be made a little bit easier by one of Elliot Daly or Henry Slade being around to kind of to give Dan Kelly a bit of experience and an easy transition for him, because Kelly has been such an important defensive leader we know how highly Kevin Sinfield thinks of him. But now with those two injuries, we are back at a very interesting juncture. I would not be surprised at all if Borthwick continues. I could almost hear sort of listeners, kind of growling before I say this, but my understanding is that Farrell and Smith have trained quite a lot together, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that. Joe Marchant's an interesting one. Really, really, really sharp in patches. Last season's Six Nations, probably England's best player in Paris.
And Ireland at home, he was outstanding as well.
And then jettisoned on the back of the first test in Australia, and quite a confusing one at that. He has the Nick Evans kind of connection there too. I'm just listing names here. To be honest, I have no idea what they're going to do. Manu Tuilagi has looked a lot more comfortable for sale at 12. But I think the fact that, and if we've done a piece today on how Freddie Stewart gets used, because he's not the classical playmaking fullback, which kind of makes you need two playmakers, and where those playmakers come. Is it Smith and Farrell? Is it one of the wings stepping up, Max Malins, that could potentially be good news for Max Malins? It's such a tricky one, because but what we know is that Borthwick will be absolutely determined to get to make this backline work in theory and make sure there's a fluidity there. And I think actually we're talking about easy wins to be made early. I think Nick Evans can make a quick difference to that kind of sliding phase play that England really stuttered and struggled with over the autumn. And I think, but that selection has to be spot on.
So on the back three, then, if for instance, if for the sake of argument, he picks Ollie Hassel-Collins on the left wing, who we know he rates, and maybe Anthony Watson returns, who's in excellent form for Leicester and who we know he rates very highly and who was called up for Henry Slade. Does that mean, therefore, that we're going to see Smith and Farrell at 10 and 12?
I would have thought so.
You don't have a playmaker in that back three, do you?
That's the balance I'm talking about. And then that's why actually I wonder whether part of the reason that Jones persisted with Farrell and Smith for so long was that somebody like Freddie Stewart was bedding in that Stewart's, and I'll talk about this in the piece that's online at the minute, but that his aerial dominance is that absolute super strength, that probably the most prominent super strength that you can think of across the whole England squad is Freddie Stewart's aerial dominance. But as I say, not a classical playmaker like Billy LaRue, like Hugo Keenan, or like Alex Good, for example. So you're making up your playmaking elsewhere, and I think that as I say, Max Malins is a good example of that. But if you want to go Hassel-Collins and Watson, I was at Leicester Saints on Saturday, and Watson was excellent, just ooze class, excellent under the high ball, one back, 4 box kicks. Leicester didn't use him very well in face play, but when he did touch the ball, usually from kick returns, electric. I think he beat 7 defenders, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him slot straight back in. But that does leave England needing a way to move the ball to the edges. And I think that could be the Smith-Farrell axis.
It'd be really pleasing to see Hassel-Collins involved, because he was one of those lads who would be pitching up to England training camps on Sunday under Eddie Jones and then heading home on Tuesday, wouldn't he? I think he must have done that about 10 times, along with as many others have done over there.
The Radwan Brigade.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting that, and just to come potentially stand up for Jones a little bit. What is that? Hassel-Collins has definitely looked sharper in defence and definitely looked sharper under the high ball, and has definitely kind of added a bit of a kicking game to what we kind of knew that he already has. And that said, and what the potential spur of that is a little bit of time around Eddie Jones. And we know sort of one thing that we keep hearing is that the coaching wasn't good enough under Jones, and I think that has kind of been reflected in the way that Steve Borthwick has cleaned house and made sure that Cockrell's been across to focus on the scrum, and we've had Nick Owens come in. But I think we can credit Jones a little bit for pushing Hassel-Collins in the right direction, and we might see other players develop. Is it sort of as a legacy of Jones? Just to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah,
it might be a gift, but not in a bad way. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely concur with that. I've not watched Hassel-Collins any more this season than I did last season. You know, we watched them all a lot. And I wouldn't have had him in my England team last season, and this season I think there has been a noticeable improvement, and I think I would have him in if I was picking the England team. I think he is in the top 2 wingers in the country this season, and I don't think he was there last season. I don't think he was as much of an all-round package as he is this season, without having something absolute superstar about him.
It's that combination, isn't it? Like you said, of improving the areas where he was lacking, but also if England can now capitalise on the strengths that he offers, those strengths, they're there in abundance with his ability to beat defenders, given his frame, given how they can use him as an option coming off the wing in midfield, sort of how they've tried to do, or sort of how England tried to do under Jones with Joe Cocker and seeing a lot, but sort of gave up with it because they did really persist with it. I keep thinking about that try against, was it Argentina in the autumn, where they used Cocker and Seeger off his wing to set up a try. They can use Hassel-Collins in a similar fashion, except he's also got blistering pace to make breaks. I think he's a really interesting player. I just wanted to add something on Dan Kelly before I forgot, because I think a lot of people, we expect Dan Kelly to start, but I think a lot of people who don't watch Leicester are going to be thinking, why is Borthwick and why do Borthwick and Sinfield have so much trust in this guy who only won 1 cap for England against Canada in the summer of 2021 and who Jones didn't look at anymore? And we spoke to Borthwick about him after the score was announced, and he gave a really interesting answer talking about Kelly's communication and just how direct Kelly is on the field, how he sort of brings everybody together, how he's so one of the most vocal people that you hear, and offers a real leadership as well as as well as being an excellent defender. And it honestly reminded me a bit of Owen Farrell when he was talking about how he's sort of the way he can generate great performances out of the players around him. But he's still only 21, 22 years old. I think he's a really, really interesting selection.
Yeah,
absolutely,
completely. He's very resourceful, very tough, very hardworking, very defensively, leader. That communication keeps cropping up time and time again. The sort of the fascination is how much stock, because when any coach comes in, they almost place their reputation in the hands of the players, so they're going to have to trust the players. And Kelly could be a safety blanket for someone like Sinfield, who knows his methods. But also he's got such a high ceiling, only 21, and seems like such an assured character. A bit of swagger about him, which is nice. Northern accents across the back line, fairly reassuring for me as well. He's got a high ceiling. He's got a high ceiling. He even looked pretty tidy in that game against Canada. And sliding doors. He got suspended on the cusp of the autumn 2021, I think, for a high shot against Saracens, and then he struggled with hamstring injuries as well, so missed the kind of run into Leicester season. But it's been excellent. I was at the game they drew with Bristol, And he just oozed class there, went off actually with about 20 minutes to go, and Bristol came back to draw. But before that, he'd been very good. Just to cycle back really, really quickly to Ollie Hassel-Collins, Borthwick mentioned his left foot, and we know for sure that England are going to kick a lot under Steve Borthwick, and we know that with Daly and Slade out, they don't have an actual left footer. That could just be another little thing that kind of nudges it in Hassel-Collins' favour.